Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest REACH webinar, Engaging Students in STEM Through Historical Narratives. My name is Dr. Michael Gazalowitz. I'm the Senior Director of the IEEE History Center that runs the REACH program on behalf of IEEE. Let's get started. And by the way, welcome and thank you for giving us your time on this important subject. Okay, so first, quick introduction. For those not familiar with IEEE REACH, IEEE is the world's largest technical professional organization that we're dedicated to advancing technology to benefit humanity. Essentially, it's a membership organization for engineers. In the United States, it's incorporated as a 501c3 in New York, state of New York. We have over 450,000 members worldwide in over 160 countries. We're dedicated to inventing technology, but IEEE also maintains a history center, which, as I mentioned, I'm the director. And our job is to help preserve research made known in the history of that technology. And we do it in a wide variety of ways. I won't go into it now. I'll mention at the very end a little bit when I mention further resources. But what we're talking about today is our program IEEE REACH, which we have specifically designed for the K-12 audience, and actually the K-12 educators. It's not meant, as you'll see, directly for the students, but for the teacher, to aid them in introducing history of technology into the classroom. So what REACH is a free open educational resource, basically aimed at middle and high school teachers and through them to their students. Though, as we'll see, the material can be used at different levels. We know there are university professors using it. We know there are elementary teachers that are chunking it down for their classroom. And we'll say what those items are in just a moment. And just want to emphasize that two things. It's in partnership with professional historians who work for the IEEE History Center. So it's both, we have pre-university curriculum people, but also actual historians who are developing the material. And again, just emphasize it's about the history of technology, highlighting how technology through time impacts society in all its aspects, culture, politics, economics, et cetera, and how in turn these social aspects influence technology. So why the history of technology? And I'm going to say something in a second about standards, but the recently deceased, well-known Henry Petrosky, who's both an engineer and historian of engineering, coined the phrase, or at least popularized the phrase, "to engineer is human." Technology and engineering, and for that matter, science and math, all of the STEM fields, are human endeavors. They don't sit out there in a vacuum. They don't, obviously, science and technology have their own, sort of parameters defined by physical reality of the universe, but how humans do that is a human activity. And obviously, within STEM, technology and engineering particularly touch our lives every day, and don't necessarily get the publicity that science and math get, or the attention in standards. I'll say on that in a sec. But they impact you and your students and me every single day. And the IEEE, for those who aren't necessarily on the STEM side, that's the International Technology and Engineering Educators Association, has standards for technological literacy. And they say to be technologically literate is not just to know how to do technology, but to understand it and how it shapes society, and in turn, how society shapes it. And history, as you can see from the diagram, technology and engineering are incredibly complicated, and society is incredibly complicated. But history lets us step back and find case studies or look at a longer time frame or a broader geographical frame or a broader conceptual frame to find case studies that help us understand what that means. What it means when you say technology impacts society and society in turn impacts technology. So what are our goals in doing this? So first of all, again, we're encouraging this engagement with history of technology and society. And as you'll see, we're doing it through an inquiry design model, which means we're enhancing students' skills, particularly in problem solving and critical thinking, but also in research, communication, and even collaboration. All of the soft skills that, for example, if you all the various white papers and so forth about industry and workplace readiness and all the soft skills that they say they want. Our approach helps help the students with those soft skills, and of course, very specifically to improve students' technological literacy, as I just assigned in the previous slide, and really, really particularly to meet the needs of the teachers. That's really what it's about. When this program started, the question was, okay, we're supposed to promote the history of technology to the broader public, but young people are not really, it's hard to get them. How do you get them? You get them the educators. Well, what are the educators doing? Are they trying to adjust in the classroom, and do they have the tools to do that? And the idea, and I'll say this in a little bit more in the next slide, the idea is that many people realize that these ideas are important, technological literacy and history of technology, but teachers don't necessarily have the tools to do it. And for the STEM teachers, they don't necessarily have, there's only so much time they're going to devote to the context, but I'm going to say a note about that in a sec. And they may not be familiar with that, and they may not have the tools. And for the social studies teachers, for history teachers, they may realize that, boy, I'm talking about the Industrial Revolution. I better talk about the impact of technology in society, but they don't have the tools to do that. So REACH is designed to give the educators, the teachers, those tools. And it does that by aligning with a number of standards. Now, so IEEE is a global organization, and REACH actually has already had some impact in the global setting, but the focus of the original conception design was the US context. And in the US, you almost chuckle when you talk about standards, right? Because there aren't national standards. Even some states, the standard, it's left up to the school district. Some school districts leave it up to the school. There are national organizations trying to promulgate standards in various fields. They have various success. But just to mention a few of the key ones, and as you'll see, we indicate which standards we align with in each unit. But basically, we attempt to align with the National Council of Social Studies C3 curriculum, the Common Core curriculum that was advanced in the social studies. On the STEM side, we meet the next gen science standards, particularly for those of you who are science teachers in the audience, ETS1 and ETS2B, the cross-cutting concepts where the idea is that students will understand the impact of science, how engineering technology impacts science and the natural world, right? And that's really what REACH is about, and what history really helps you do. And finally, I mentioned already the IEEE STEL, Standards for Technology and Engineering Literacy, and those are very actually explicit. They have basically 8 core disciplines, and 3 of them are addressed directly by REACH. Influence of society on technological development, impacts of technology, and I love them for this, history of technology. So they've actually they only revised the standards a few years ago, and they explicitly recognize the value of historical case studies in promoting technological literacy. Okay, so what is in REACH? REACH provides a complete toolkit. It's an inquiry design model. So it's built around a specific technology and societal implications. By the way, I know that screenshot's not very readable. I'm going to go into this in more detail in a few minutes, and I'm going to show you the website so you see it in action. But there is an inquiry design lesson plan with an overarching and supporting questions and the various exercises that go with that. The background information for the teacher, because we don't assume the teacher has background in any of these particular areas. So we want to make sure that they feel comfortable with it. I guess as a side, when I show I'm going to mention some of the access opportunities, but the site is public, not behind a firewall or a paywall or a sign-in wall or anything. So your students could actually look at the background information. I doubt much students would be that industrious. So it's really your choice if you want to share that. If you say, okay, I like, instead of me sort of feeding it little pieces and giving them the primary documents, I'm comfortable sharing with them all the background. But we want to make sure that you, the teacher, have the background you need, both about the technology and its impact to teach a unit on that particular technology. The example I'm going to use today is actually unmanned aerial vehicles, or drones, as they're commonly called. But this screenshot happens to be refrigerated rail cars, which you'll see in a moment is another one of the units. Then I just mentioned there are primary source materials for the students to do to analyze and do the various activities on. And we have both. They're both source materials integrated into the unit, and then a bunch of additional source materials, and those are everything is accessible on the site. And then we also give you an opportunity to go out, and I'll show you to the where the material originates and study the original source material. It's all things that are available online from repositories around the world, basically museums, historical organizations, and also the patent office and organizations like that from around the world. There are multimedia resources. We produce our own videos. And I'll show you a very brief snippet of one of those. The idea of the videos is, this is the one thing that we really feel is besides the hands-on activities, that's really geared directly to the students. They're meant to be short, engaging, so to raise more questions than they answer, in a sense. And we think they engage students who, especially in this day and age, who are visual learners or used to video. You could show it in class. You could have it do it in an inverted classroom. There's a number of ways you can use that, but there's a series. Each unit has at least one, and the drones has one, and some have several short 4 to 6 minute videos about the topic at hand that are geared at the students. And then for each unit, there's at least one engaging hands-on activity. Now, as you'll see, these are not clever, complicated design things, build a robot kind of thing. We do, as you'll see, we do link to other resources that, especially on the STEM side, for people who want to get more into the design element of things. These are simple things to get the students, first of all, get tactile learners thinking, to get students out of their seats, to have them work in groups, to work on collaboration aspect. I'm going to show you the drones in a couple of minutes, but to give you another example, for the skyscraper unit, it's basically building tall structures with marshmallows and straws, working in teams, just to get them understanding without getting actually, design a skyscraper, use CAD software, that kind of thing. It's like, okay, what do you have, if you need to build a tall structure for social reasons, that's going to have social implication, but what are the scientific and technological, the physical limitations of that, and how do you overcome those? So that, in a very brief nutshell, is what REACH provides, and I'm going to show you the specific example in just a moment. Here's the current units. There are 10 units currently. The next unit, which we hope to launch Q1Q next year, will be on renewable energy. You see the range here in time, space, and technology. Again, today we're talking about drones as the example. We go all the way back to Greek triremes over 2,000 years ago, right up to information theory, which is something developed in the last 50 years, radio, which is a key technology of the 20th century, freighted rail cars are a key technology of the 19th century, skyscrapers are late 19th, early 20th, and of course, around the world, Europe, North America, early maritime navigation goes everywhere from Africa to China to North America, and so forth. Okay, now to kick off drones, I'm going to show you this is a 5-minute student video, but I'm just going to show you the first minute and a half or 2 minutes just to give you a taste for what our videos look like. And we produce these ourselves, and we engage experts. In this one, you'll see we have the curator from the Intrepid Sea, Air, and Space Museum in New York City talking to us about drones.
Well, a lot of people think drones are a new phenomenon, but they're really not. They really go back in history quite far. During the American Civil War, somebody actually applied for a patent to put on an unmanned balloon, floated over the enemy lines using wind and wind speed to judge all that, and with a timer mechanism that would release an explosive over the enemy. UAV stands for unmanned aerial vehicle. When talking about UAVs or drones, there's still the human element. You still have to have somebody to launch it and control it. There may be some levels of autonomy in its flight path. In the future, these levels of autonomy may take on artificial intelligence. But today, the technology is that you need a human being to essentially get it off the ground and get its mission started. So a really great example of a semi-autonomous system, you can go all the way back to World War II.
For the past several months, since 10th March, long-range free balloons released in Japan carried explosives to the North American continent.
The Japanese realized that the trade winds on certain times of the year blew directly from Japan right to the northwestern parts of the United States and Canada. So what they devised were these very clever balloon bombs. These were expendable, cheap to make, paper envelope, hydrogen-filled balloons. When launched, they could carry a series of incendiary bombs, which start fires, or even a demolition-type bomb. They also had a series of mechanisms on there, and it could read its altitude. If it got too low and came out of that trade wind that was booking it across the Pacific, it could drop bags of sand, and then it would rise up. If it got too high, a valve would simply open, allowing some of the hydrogen gas to escape, bringing the balloon back down. And these weren't really meant to attack us in a great way of like hitting factories or destroying cities. These were meant to divert us. It really didn't pan out that way. There was over 9,000 of these things launched against us. They were found anywhere from Canada, Alaska, all the way down to Mexico. So there's several technical principles that had to be developed in order.
Okay, so that gives you an idea about that. I should mention it's covered in the unit. So as the curator pointed out, they were meant to sort of sow havoc. It was hoping they would start forest fires in the Northwest, which was our lumber supply and so forth. The only casualties in the homeland in World War II for the United States was one of these bombs actually landed on a church picnic in Oregon and killed a teacher and several students, which is sort of an interesting historical fact. But anyway, so yeah. So what I do now is very briefly summarize essentially the teacher background for drones. What is the history of drones, of unmanned aerial vehicles? And then show you how the site, how the Inquiry Design Unit addresses this to solve, to carry out REACH's goals of technological literacy and student engagement and so forth. So I'm going to actually say this a little bit more when I show the site. But so we've said that history is an ideal prism, and so we're going to use this example. So the society has lots of aspects, and one unfortunate aspect is warfare, and it goes way back. Right? If you've if you've seen 2001: A Space Odyssey, the classic movie, it goes back to our pre-human ancestors. And one of the things from early on that people wanted to do is find a way to hurt other people, to engage the enemy, so people divide themselves into us and them, and the enemy to engage them from a distance through the air, right? So in a way, early projectiles are unmanned aerial vehicles, right? Though with very limited control. Hopefully, as we'll see, all technologies are multiple use, and warfare technologies are often dual use. Sometimes things are developed in civilian sectors that are applied to warfare, and often things are developed in warfare that are applied to civilian sectors. But this is one of the oldest technologies. So actually, spears go way back to early hominids, but early modern humans figured out the bow and arrow. It's at least 12,000 years old. And in a sense, it's the first complex technology. You need to get a piece of wood that's the right shape and size and is bendable. You need to get some kind of rope type thing that can attach to it. So it's a compound material. Then you need the arrow, which needs to be a sharpened stick or a stick with some kind of projectile point. But then it needs, if it's really going to be effective, it needs some kind of feathering, flocking to make it fly straight. And then there's the skill involved in it. So it's a very complicated, it seems simple to us now. It's extremely complicated technology compared to what went before. And it was used, obviously, probably for hunting also in terms of dual use, but very clearly we have evidence for warfare from early times. Excuse me. By Greek times, something like 2,500 years ago, they developed a number of sophisticated catapults that can send large numbers of different projectiles from rocks to giant arrows, so basically giant crossbows. And ultimately, they developed, if you see here, a medieval example, the trebuchet, where you use a counterweight to increase the power. So you're not just relying on human power, and springs, but actually additional energy can be applied. Then, of course, the going of gunpowder, first in China and then moving to the West, completely revolutionizes this idea of throwing dumb projectiles. Excuse me. Okay, now we're going to change the story. So here's another piece of the story, which is that there are often different technologies that are enabling for one another, right? So people working in totally different inventors or scientists or engineers, whatever you want to call them, working in different areas, sometimes those things converge later. So a separate dream from, unfortunately, killing your enemy from a great distance while minimizing the danger to yourself, right, by saying being up in a castle behind a pillar and shooting arrows. Another long-held dream goes back again to Greek times, to Greek myths, is to be able for people to fly, right? So we have the myth of Icarus. We have Leonardo da Vinci, the great polymath of the Renaissance, doing diagrams of various ways to try and get people to fly. They're all based on bird analogs. So basically, from earliest times, people looked up and saw birds flying and said, why can't we fly? Leonardo was never able to get that to work, nor any others. But when the scientific revolution came in, people started to say, okay, now we can apply science and math, as they now came to understand it, scientific method, to figure out, can we make a heavier than air vehicle go through the atmosphere? Now, the other piece that people realize when you have understanding, Lavoisier, those of you who are science teachers, isolating oxygen, the element oxygen, and so forth, is, well, what if we can make a vehicle lighter than air? Then we wouldn't have to propel it something heavier than air through the air. It would float. Once they understood the principle, and obviously Archimedes understood the principle of flotation, but once they really understood this, they realized that was a possibility. And of course, that technology advanced first. By 1783, the Montgolfier brothers in France were able to demonstrate, and you see their balloon here. There's Leonardo's diagram. Here's their balloon. That just by heating air, that heated air expands and weighs less than cold air. And so you can use that to float through the air. And they demonstrated this as early as 1783. Meanwhile, Lavoisier was able to produce hydrogen, and they started playing with the idea of other lighter than air gases. The disadvantage of heated air is that you have to keep it hot, and it can, if you have a flame in the balloon, it can catch the balloon material on fire. As many of you know from history, that hydrogen has a lot of advantages as a lighter than air gas, but it also is highly combustible, as was demonstrated in the Hindenburg disaster in history. Ultimately, helium is decided to be a better product, but anyway, ballooning becomes a major technology, and based again on scientific principles and applied in a whole range of areas. However, meanwhile, people didn't give up on heavier than air flight, and ultimately, the Wright brothers essentially solved the problem in 1903. So another 120 years later, you still have balloons, as we'll see, but you have heavier than air flight. Okay. Again, separate from artillery, which has existed, since the 15th century at least, and maybe earlier in China, though, one of the sort of interesting big picture facts of history is the ability of the Chinese to make really fundamental inventions and then to have it advanced and adapted in the West, usually for warfare, more effectively than the Chinese did. So in that, we also talk about in the early maritime navigation unit, we talk about the Chinese inventing the magnetic compass, but the West using it, weaponizing it as a means for war and colonialism. So the same thing here. The Europeans have perfected artillery, and now with balloons initially, they realized, first of all, we can use these for reconnaissance. Like if we don't have the high ground, we can create our own high ground. And then they said, well, wait a sec. We can sail the balloons over the enemy. We can drop bombs on them. And so instead of shooting bombs at them with artillery, which has a whole bunch of challenges in terms of aiming and accuracy, right? So they're unmanned aerial vehicles that are meant to deliver damage at the other end, but they're not piloted. Well, what if we pilot a balloon directly over the target and drop a bomb on the target? And of course, this becomes amplified in World War I. I should mention, by the way, also between then, another interesting side note invention is the manned kite. So in the Boer War, the British actually used giant kites that could actually lift a man under proper weather conditions, and they use those for reconnaissance. So that's a sort of another avenue to heavier than air flight, using the lift principle of the kite. But as the planes become perfected after 1903, and then going to World War I in 1914 and the next few years, pilot airplanes become very important for warfare, for reconnaissance, for strafing, for bombing, and all those unfortunate things. And there's actually folks working this, trying to put these two together and say, well, maybe instead of shooting a projectile out of a cannon, maybe you could have a small plane, what we would call a plane, or what now we would call a drone, right? Using a gyroscope for stability, actually aim bombs at the enemy that way. And Kettering and Wright, Orville Wright of the Wright brothers, and Charles Kettering, the really famous engineer who basically pioneered the U.S. automotive industry, but turned to working on planes and warfare in World War I, worked on an area torpedo, and so did Sperry, but they were never used in combat in World War I. Okay, now another enabling technology. We have a reach unit on radio, on the origins and early uses of radio. We focus on broadcast. Radio was developed as a communication tool, first as point-to-point and then as broadcast. But early on, people realized that those signals could be used to actually control things. And by the 30s, two inventors, William Walgood, had pioneered radio-controlled model airplanes. So this became, for those who couldn't afford or were scared of becoming hobby pilots in small planes, they could have the flying experience of controlling a small model airplane by radio control. And in 1937, an inventor named Reginald Denny developed a radio control model airplane and founded a company in Van Nuys, California. Now, here's what's interesting. The first use of these is to throw them away. So in the lead up to World War II, the question is, all right, I already mentioned artillery is difficult to use. That's a whole separate technology that, again, we only brush in this unit. But basically, aiming ordnance trajectories is extremely difficult, and it's even more difficult at sea. So ship to land trajectory is extremely difficult, and ship to ship, was a huge scientific and technological problem that was worked on. Basically, ultimately was solved in World War II by the invention of the computer, which is covered in the information theory unit. But they decided that, okay, we need to train and practice shooting planes out of the air from ships. The Navy, because the Navy was, but the units were separate. Navy was there was no Air Force, and Navy and the Army never talked to each other in World War II. So the Department of Defense of the U.S. decided that these drones, as we've now called them, these radio controlled airplanes, would be perfect for target practice, because you wouldn't want to really be shooting at a manned plane of one of your people. So we could train and test trajectory devices and so forth on these drones, and they became, as part of the U.S. Industrial effort in World War II, they mass produced these drones. So this is an interesting picture. We didn't collect the demographics of this audience for this talk. This was meaningless to your students probably, but in any event, this young woman here in a publicity photo for the Denny radio plane company in Van Nuys was one of the workers, who was, her day job was assembling drones, and she was just beginning a modeling career because of her striking looks, and they asked her to pose, and probably paid her extra, for a publicity photo for the company. So that model's name was Norma Jean Mortensen, and since she was already in LA area, she went and tried out for Hollywood and took the screen name Marilyn Monroe. So this is kind of an interesting for some of us who are old enough. Funny side note, not obviously directly relevant to the points we're trying to make about the history of drones. Toward the end, the U.S. decided that these drones actually could be weaponized, and started to develop early guided missiles. And of course, the Germans responded with the V-1 and ultimately the V-2 rocket. Okay. So what's interesting is that improvement in electronics came out of World War II and were really emphasized during the Cold War, and photography, video, and ultimately computing meant that drone technology could really advance. Now, what's interesting, you get into issues now of talking about sort of the economic. You talk about, we talk about war, but it's always bad, but the economics of it, right? So these things, these drones, especially as they became more sophisticated and more electronics and all that, were kind of expensive to blow up and just throw in as, suicide, not suicide because no one's on it, but to smash into the enemy. But they became more and more of a reconnaissance, and that meant that there were more and more uses of them outside of the military, right? For example, right away, the government realized that they were really good for monitoring forest fires and helping to fight forest fires, where you can, the firefighter, and we've seen, and now, of course, in the 21st century, I'm talking about still the 20th century, in the 21st century, when global warming has caused fires to become worse, it's even more of a critical thing. And I'll talk about the hands-on activity in a sec. But they realized, okay, we can use these in other, the Department of Interior can use these to monitor things. That led to archaeologists realizing they can be used for remote sensing to find hidden sites that are only visible from the air. I mean, already planes had been used to detect, manned planes to detect archaeological sites in remote places, but now you could send in a drone. Expensive, but less expensive than flying a manned aircraft. Ultimately, we would see them used in interplanetary exploration, for remote medicine. Most recently, if you saw the news about DJI, the major Chinese drone company, they've been delivering packages to Mount Everest and removing the trash. I understand, I haven't seen it myself, but that Amazon does some experimental drone deliveries even in cities in the US. Of course, now in the 21st century, the reduction in the cost and construction complexity of drones has led them back to becoming a major military component. And this is perhaps being seen most clearly in the Ukraine-Russia war. Drones are a significant, again, military factor, not just for reconnaissance. So if you've been following it and reading a lot of the media reports, it's extremely important reconnaissance, but they're also used actually for attack, and also for delivery of supplies and retrieval and so forth. So they've become really just an ubiquitous technology and one that students are familiar with. So it's interesting to note that they have this deep history of a number of different technological threads that had to come together to make modern drones possible. And we saw in the video, the curator from Intrepid pointing out that more and more, because we don't really know what's going on, but we think more and more we're seeing AI used. But basically, most of these, and if you're reading the reports from the front lines in Ukraine, most of these drones are still radio controlled. So how do we show this to the students? So this is the REACH website, which is taking lots of time to load for some reason. There's a I don't know why it's doing a long handshake, as a little message down here says, but there's a carousel up here with some interesting videos and news. But basically, this is the main. There's about, contact, news, search. There they are. But the main navigation bars across the top here, you can look at all the ingredients, all the primary sources that I mentioned, all the videos I mentioned, all the hands-on activities, but you really want to go by unit. So here's all the 10 units I showed you. Here's drones. Okay. Apologize for the slow connection. Okay. So it's an inquiry design, so it's a compelling question. All right, this is my chance to point out, as you'll see, but we won't see all of it, so I'll point it out here. Everything is completely downloadable. The inquiry design unit is downloadable. The teacher background is downloadable. It's PDF. The multimedia is downloadable in any video format you choose. The primary sources are all downloadable as PDFs, and the hands-on activities are downloadable as PDFs. So everything, if there's bandwidth issues or other ways you want to use it, the REACH in a different way, everything can be loaded onto a device, either a laptop or a handheld device, and used locally. So that's one thing to point out. So again, there's teacher background information. If I download, it'll just show up as a PDF. I won't show you that. So this is an introduction, and there's a full several-page written with illustrated story of what I basically just told you in 10 minutes. Here's the video, which I showed you some of. Okay, so I think without showing you the whole inquiry unit in the PDF, because that involves stopping and starting sharing again, but we have on the website itself in the HTML, we have everything summarized. So the spring questions are, what is and what are its components? Each supporting question has a performative task, and then there are featured sources. So if it'll load, so the feature sources go out to actual real sources available on the internet. Sometimes we have them in locally, and then a link to the further out. And these are the materials that the students will use for that. I don't know if you could see that because it opened in a different tab. You have an opportunity to sign up for a newsletter, which I'll mention at the end if you stay on the site long enough. The next question is historical origins. We have to create a tree and we give them all the sources they need to do that. They can work individually in groups. They can work at home or in the classroom, whatever suits your needs. You can show the video, the background video, at whatever point you think is appropriate. Here we ask them to think about the different applications, to do a timeline, and then how might we always come back to the present, and so create a mock company, and again we give them the sources to do that, and then there's always a final summary task in the full, if you download the full unit, and the full unit also has all of the sources integrated into it. So you have one lesson design plan that has all the questions in a grid with all of the things. If you're using it online, it's linkable, or you can print out the PDF. We always have additional sources. We link IEEE has a you might call it a sister site, tryengineering.org, which is a site more of a traditional design curriculum site. So when they, in their units, when they want more social background, they link to us. And when they have an appropriate design unit or design hands-on activity, we link to them. So they have a designing drones unit. Again, that's just going to not download there, but okay. But then, so we have a PDF of it, which then links back to their site, and then we link to the Stemulator, which is a STEM site in South Africa that has a lot of really good visions for visual learners. It's a textless site with, you click on everything and it tells you how things work. It's a how things work site. Then, as I mentioned, within the unit, so we already looked at the video is here, and you can link to it from the unit. The primary sources are all here. You can learn more about the V1. And then this page lets you download the whole thing as PDF or visit the source, actually go out on the web and visit the source that we got it from, whether it's the Library of Congress, whatever. So here you see the range of, again, they're in the unit. There are recommended sources, but there's a whole list of primary sources you can use to expand that the students can use in solving the inquiry design. Obviously, you can design it to do their own research out on the web. I'll say something about it in just a moment. So that's interesting. And then, of course, the hands-on activity, which again, downloadable. But here it is. You can download the PDF. It's very simple. Basically, the students construct in essentially a shoebox a Lego village. Then they shake the box, like set it on fire, and they usually do that in classroom, like it was shake it up like it was an earthquake or some natural disaster. And then the students use their cell phones as a drone without looking in. They fly over and take a video and see how they can assess the damage based on that video. So again, just go up to time aggregation. So I showed you the so just if you're curious, if it'll load. So this link shows you all of the primary sources available. And you can see there are multiple pages because it's all the units, and it tells you which unit it goes with. And they're organized by unit. You can do the same with all the videos. and the same with all the hands-on activities. And going back to the homepage, I should point out everything is searchable by everything is searchable by, first of all, we have these are the common core areas of human endeavor. Notice warfare is here, and they map closely, though not exactly, to the AP history things. You can search by that. And you can also do a general text search, or there's an opportunity to search by within the main menu by those topics, by either AP or by the Common Core topics, by the era, or by geography. So everything is either generally searchable, or there's a pretty clear table of contents. There's essentially an index by these topics, and then everything is fully searchable. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing, I hope, and return, I hope, to my PowerPoint. Hopefully I can resume this. I hope. Okay. So how do we recommend? Many of you may be familiar with inquiry design. Interestingly, obviously science classes have always done what we would now call an inquiry design model, right? Where you want the students to work themselves to test a hypothesis and to use materials and so forth. It's more newer in the social studies. So we recommend you review the questions and background information. You consult the teacher background, review the staging of the question, then you choose, because you don't have to use the whole unit. You can if you choose. We would love that. But you choose which performative tasks, documents, videos, and hands-on activities might work for you. And you'll have to do every supporting question. You might want to focus in on one. And then at the end, you can choose a summative performance task. And we always try and tie those back. So like the one about the printing press actually ties back to the use of the internet to transform society today. So the way the printing press transformed society in the 15th century Europe, how has the internet transformed society today? And we always try and have that include an informed action. So say students, write to your congressperson about, as an example of something you might do, write to your congressperson about internet censorship or whatever it might be. Whoops, you're not seeing how is it not? No. Try that again. Gotta go back. Down here. Let's try that. Now you should be seeing it larger. Sorry about that. So that's how we recommend using the classroom. We welcome dialogue on that. As I'll point out, we welcome you to join our mailing list and engage with us in a dialogue. Many of you, I'm sure, are very experienced teachers, but this gives you an idea of how you might use REACH, and with this example of drones that I've just given you. Just really quick mention. So the History Center, as I mentioned, we have a lot of resources, but we didn't feel that they were teacher or student friendly. They're more for the technologically literate already technologically general public. But we do have a site called the Engineering Technology History Wiki, ethw.org, which contains encyclopedia-style articles about all range of technologies. A map of milestones and landmarks have been recognized by various engineering societies of these historical events. This is Shaky, the first AI independent robot in this picture here. Oral histories, which of course can only cover, the top 70, 75 years, but oral histories and first-hand histories of important engineers and scientists and technologists. A range of archival materials. So if you want to dig deeper, if you're a STEM teacher and want to dig deeper on the technology, we have these additional resources, which we welcome you to do it. But the idea of REACH was was for the teacher, to make it easy for you to find the materials you need to introduce the history of technology into the pre-university classroom. You can follow us for on social. Again, I mentioned sign up for a newsletter. If you go to the website, I should have pointed out when I was there. I apologize. Right in the upper right, you can sign up. But if you stay on the site long enough and you don't sign up, you'll get a pop-up that says, "Hey, don't you want to sign up for our newsletter?" And you can sign up right there. So that being said, thank you so much for your time and your interest in the REACH program and your interest in the history of technology, whether you're a technology teacher or a history teacher. We thank you for your interest in interdisciplinarity. And at that, I'm going to turn it over to Josh to let me know if there are any questions that I can answer in these final 6 minutes.
We have one question that came in, Mike. It says, has IEEE REACH planned an alignment with individual state standards?
Great question. So we have given a number of webinars and even since the end of the pandemic, in-person things to various state organizations in various ways. We're an associate member of the CS4 on the history side, the Council of Social Studies, State Social Studies Specialists. We've presented to them, and we are open to a dialogue for that. So I mentioned at the front that the United States is very tricky, right? We can go into France and we can talk to the Minister of Education. There's a national curriculum, right? No such thing in the US. We can't be, and our curricular experts that we consult with, so those are out-of-house consultants. The historians are, the professional PhD level historians are in-house people. They can't know every state curriculum. We are happy to work with, I don't think I can see participants, can I? We're happy to work with, I don't think I can, oh well. We're happy to work with, oh, actually, Gretchen is on board. We're happy to work with people in local states. We're working right now with Gretchen Bedard. I apologize for calling you out, Gretchen. I see she's on, to work with the North Carolina standards. So we recognize we need to do that, but we can only do that through local partnerships. To give an extreme example, I mentioned international. We have IEEE has a relationship with UNESCO to do educational programs in really engineering programs in Africa, but we actually did a pilot program with REACH in Uganda, and we actually worked with an NGO on the ground in Uganda to develop the REACH curriculum to match the Uganda national. And they fortunately have a national curriculum, so we don't have to do it in every state, the national curriculum. So it can be done because we looked at C3 and Common Core and NGS Next Gen and ITA. We think it's very flexible and it could be matched to state standards, but that's hard for us to do on our own. That works. Okay, and we're exactly on time. So again, thank you everyone very much. We really appreciate it. We hope, from our point of view, because our mission is to do this, so we hope we're reaching a lot of people and you find it useful, but one of our missions is to help you. So we really hope you find it useful. Everybody have a great morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you are. We kind of designed this one to be kind of an East Coast afternoon thing, but we know people log in from everywhere when you're talking about the web. So have a great day and thank you again.